Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of Compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
Top compliance stories for the week ending April 13, 2024. We begin with the ubiquitous Wirecard, as Wirecard shareholders have sued EY in Germany over alleged asset stripping, which EY is alleged to have allowed the company to do. The story comes to us from the Financial Times, who has been one of the great reporters on the Wirecard scandal. And former Wirecard shareholders are suing EY Germany over alleged asset stripping as they fear a complex organizational revamp at the firm will make it harder, if not impossible, to enforce damage claims over the alleged flaws of the defunct payments group. EY is facing an avalanche of lawsuits from Wirecard investors demanding billions of dollars. And, of course, they've reorganized, which magically made the Germany business unit disappear. Next up from Law 360, the ever-present and everly seeming ongoing trial of two ex-Cognizant's executives has been moved yet again. A New Jersey federal judge agreed to reschedule the trial of two former execs to September because of a putative conflict with one of the defense lawyers. That conflict, however, was resolved. The conflict was around the trial of Senator Robert Menendez. Well, that's been put off now due to the health issue of his wife. But the Cognizant trial was already put off. So we've been trying to have this trial for, I think, 5 years now, and still not here yet. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance, the first of several articles from the Risk and Compliance Journal. This one from Richard Vandeford. And it's the U.S. Will crack down on an import method favored by e-commerce giants from China to allow cheap clothes from China to flow in the United States with no duties and little scrutiny. Obviously, this is a concern around the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and so this loophole will be closed. Next up from the BBC, the U.S. citizen who was arrested in Nigeria, the Binance employee, I should say, has pled not guilty to money laundering charges in a Nigerian court. There were two arrests, one of a Brit, one of a U.S. The Brit hightailed and snuck out of the country under the dark of night, but Tigran Gambarian was arrested and is still in jail in Nigeria. Next up, from another story from the Wall Street Journal. This one is on yet another imbroglio for Boeing, as yet another whistleblower has claimed flaws in the 787 Dreamliner. So Boeing is still facing an avalanche of investigations, lawsuits, incredibly bad publicity. The CEO has announced an early resignation, and now another whistleblower has come forward with design and manufacturing flaws on the Dreamliner. So Boeing continues to spiral downward and not seem to be able to pull itself out of this imbroglio. Next up from Reuters, I mentioned the trial of Senator Robert Menendez for corruption. He, of course, has pled not guilty, as well as his wife. Well, the trial has been postponed because of a health emergency on his wife. She's had to have surgery, and the trial's been postponed to July. So at some point, Menendez will go to trial. Whether he runs again for Congress, open question. Next up, first of a couple of more stories from Financial Times, another Wirecard story. Well, it turns out that Juan Marsalic, the COO of Wirecard, the number 2, may have been running Russian spy operations literally across Europe. Probably should be no surprise given the reception that he has received in Moscow, being welcomed with open arms, and it would go a long way to explain why it appeared to be a criminal organization. Well, it was a criminal organization. Whether Marsalic ever comes to justice in the West, of course, is an open question. But if he was working as a spy for Russia, I doubt that they would send him back. Our second story from the Financial Times comes to us, is about the Vietnamese property tycoon Truong My Lan, who was sentenced to death by a court in Ho Chi Minh City for embezzling more than $12 billion in the country's largest financial fraud. This was a huge black eye for both Vietnam and for the Vietnamese Communist Party. Corruption literally at the highest level, and it does not appear that this money will ever be recovered. So the people who invested in her and with her are going to be SOL. So if you want to fight fraud, perhaps a death penalty is something that should be on the table. Next up, very troubling news from Bloomberg. Jacob Zuma is back on the South African ballot. Yes, the corrupt former president of South Africa and ANC head who led state capture, or at least allowed it to happen under his regime, is back on the ballot. And if he wins, he's going to be clearly at odds with the current president, Ramaphosa. I don't know what that will do to the perception of corruption in South Africa, but I have to believe that it can only be much, much worse if Jacob Zuma is back in control. I mentioned more trouble with Boeing on a whistleblower, and there's yet more trouble with Boeing from another article from the Wall Street Journal. And this one was from reporting on the journal, or from the journal rather, which turned up that Boeing executives were taking personal flights on Boeing jets and charging it back as business travel. What's the significance of this lying, cheating, and stealing? Well, first of all, it's income to those executives. 2, it should not be a business deduction to Boeing. Now, there are many companies who have found themselves in this state, but given the scrutiny Boeing is under, people are going to find, I think it was Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, you see all the rats running around. Well, that sure is what's happening with Boeing. And the company needs to understand that it will be under intense scrutiny from not only the top press in the United States and literally across the world, but by investors, by activists, and others. So I hope Boeing can begin to right the ship, but they have a huge cultural problem. Which brings up the Boeing case study Sam Silverstein and I will be doing on Tuesday, April 22nd. I hope you will check that out. We will have information on it on the Compliance Podcast Network and on our daily newsletter. So the Boeing imbroglio continues. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, this month's sponsor for the entire Compliance Podcast Network is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. check out the website, and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.